The reading room of the Langford estate had never been so full, yet it had never felt so empty. Relatives filled the carefully arranged chairs, their postures straight, their expressions composed, their patience measured down to the second. Lawyers shuffled papers near the long mahogany table. Cousins who had not spoken to each other in years sat close enough to share an armrest. Aunts adjusted pearl necklaces. Uncles checked the time on watches that cost more than most people earned in a year. And at the center of it all, in a chair too large for her small frame, sat a young black girl named Lila Langford, the only person in the room who had not chosen to be there. Her hands rested in her lap, folded neatly the way her mother had taught her before everything changed. Her shoes did not quite touch the floor. Her hair had been pulled back into two careful braids that morning by a housekeeper she barely knew, and she had not said a word since she walked into the room some time earlier. She did not look at the lawyers. She did not look at the relatives who kept smiling at her with smiles that did not reach their eyes. She looked at the door. "Lila, sweetheart," one of the lawyers said gently, leaning slightly forward. "Do you understand what we've explained to you?" She gave a small nod. She understood more than they thought. Her parents had died in a car accident some time earlier. Her father, Elias Langford, had been the youngest son of the family that had built half the buildings along the city's east side. Her mother, a quiet woman named Clara, had been a school teacher before she became a Langford. Lila had loved them both in the simple, complete way children love before they learn to measure it. And now they were gone. And what remained was a fortune, a name, and a question no one had expected to ask. Elias Langford had left a will. In it, he had written something unexpected, something the family had read aloud several times to make sure they understood. He had named no specific guardian for his daughter. Instead, he had asked Lila herself to choose. "She knows who has been kind to her," he had written. "She knows who has seen her. Let her choose, and let it be honored." The lawyers had explained it as best they could. The court would approve her choice, unless it was unsafe. The money would follow the guardian until she came of age. And the relatives, all of them, had spent the past few weeks making themselves visible to the young girl in ways they had never bothered to do while her parents were alive. There had been gifts. There had been visits. There had been a sudden blooming interest in her schoolwork, her favorite colors, her thoughts on dolls and books, and what she wanted to be when she grew up. Aunt Vivian had taken her to a boutique. Uncle Bernard had bought her a pony she did not ask for. A cousin she had met only a couple of times had sent her handwritten letters that smelled like perfume and meant nothing. Lila had been polite to all of them. Her mother had raised her to be polite. But politeness was not the same as trust, and trust was not the same as love, and she knew the difference, even if the adults around her had forgotten. "Lila," the lawyer said again, "when you're ready, you can tell us who you've chosen." The room held its breath. Many pairs of eyes turned toward her. Many carefully practiced expressions waited to react. She lifted her head slowly, her voice, when it came, small but clear. "I want Mr. Harlan." For a moment, no one moved. The lawyer blinked. A cousin near the back leaned forward as if she had misheard. "Mr. Harlan," the lawyer repeated carefully. "Sweetheart, can you tell us who Mr. Harlan is?" Lila's hands stayed folded in her lap. She looked at the lawyer the way she had looked at the door, with quiet certainty. "He's the doorman," she said, "at our building, the old one with the gray hair." A sound moved through the room that was not quite a gasp and not quite a laugh. Aunt Vivian's hand flew to her chest. Uncle Bernard's jaw tightened. Someone near the window whispered something sharp that the lawyer pretended not to hear. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Lila, the doorman, are you sure you understand what we're asking?" She nodded once. "He's the only one who was ever kind to me," she said, and the room, for the first time that morning, fell completely silent. The silence stretched longer than it should have. It was the kind of silence that did not belong in a room full of lawyers and family members and people who had practiced their reactions for weeks. It was the silence of something unplanned, something nobody had prepared a response for. And for a few seconds, no one knew what to do with it. Then, Aunt Vivian laughed. It was a short, brittle laugh, the kind that tried to make a serious moment feel like a misunderstanding. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, leaning forward, her voice softening the way adults soften their voices when they want a child to change their mind without realizing it. "I think you might be confused. Mr. Harlan is just the doorman, honey. He opens the door. He's not family." Leela did not look at her. She kept her eyes on the lawyer, the one who had asked her the question in the first place. She had been told very carefully that the answer was hers. She had been told no one else got to decide. The lawyer, whose name was Mr. Caldwell, was not a man easily surprised. He had handled estates for many years, and he had seen children manipulated, coached, bribed, and frightened into saying what their relatives wanted them to say. What he had not seen in all those years was a child say something that no one in the room had even considered as a possibility. "Lila," he said gently, "I want to make sure I understand. The Mr. Harlan, you mean? Does he work at the building where you lived with your mother and father?" "Yes, sir," she said. "And do you know his full name?" She thought about it for a moment. "Mr. Harlan Reeves," she said. "He told me once that his first name was Harlan, but he said I could just call him Mr. Harlan because that's what polite girls call grown-ups." A small sound came from Uncle Bernard's direction, something between a scoff and a sigh. He shifted in his chair and crossed his arms. "This is absurd," he said, not loudly but loud enough. "A doorman. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." "I do understand," Lila said. It was the first time she had spoken without being asked a question. Her voice was still quiet, but it had a steadiness to it that surprised the room a second time. Mr. Caldwell held up a hand toward Uncle Bernard, without taking his eyes off her. "Let her speak." Lila took a small breath. Her hands stayed folded. She had been raised to sit still when she spoke about serious things, and she sat very still now. "Mr. Harlan was there every day," she said. "When I came home from school, he would open the door and say, 'Good afternoon.' He always remembered my name. He always asked how my day was, and when I was sad, he could tell. Even when I tried to hide it, he would say, 'Miss Lila, you don't have to smile if you don't feel like it. The lobby will be fine without your smile today.'" A few people in the room exchanged glances. One of the cousins, a younger woman who had said almost nothing all morning, looked down at her hands. "When Mommy and Daddy died," Lila continued, her voice not quite breaking, but bending slightly at the edges. "He was the first person who came to me. Not at the funeral. Before that. He was in the lobby when the police brought me back to the building. He knelt down so he was the same height as me. He didn't say anything for a long time. And then he said, 'Miss Lila, I am so sorry. I am so very sorry.' And he meant it. He didn't say anything else. He just meant it." The room had grown very still again. "None of you came," she added. It was not said with anger. It was said the way a child states a fact she has already finished feeling angry about. The way a child states something she has accepted as true. Aunt Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. Uncle Bernard uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again. Someone in the back of the room cleared their throat and did not speak. "You came after," Lila said. "After the lawyers called, after the will. You came with presents and you said nice things, but Mr. Harlan was already there. He was there the whole time. He's the only one who was ever kind to me when there was nothing to get." Mr. Caldwell set down his pen. He looked at the girl for a long moment, then he looked at the room, slowly taking in every face. "I think," he said quietly, "we should send for Mr. Harlan." The request landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples moved through the gathered family in small, controlled ways. A whisper here, a shifted posture there. Aunt Vivian pressed her lips together so tightly they nearly disappeared. Uncle Bernard, leaned toward the lawyer beside him, and murmured something that earned no response. "Mr. Caldwell," Aunt Vivian said carefully, her voice now stripped of its earlier sweetness. "Surely you don't intend to take this seriously. She's a child, a grieving child. She doesn't know what she's choosing." Mr. Caldwell turned to face her with the slow patience of a man who had practiced never raising his voice. "Mrs. Langford," he said, "the will of your brother-in-law was very specific. It was witnessed, notarized, and reviewed by several attorneys before he signed it. He anticipated that this exact conversation might happen. He prepared for it. He opened the leather folder in front of him and turned a page. He wrote, and I quote, "If any member of my family attempts to dismiss, override, or pressure my daughter regarding her choice, that family member shall be removed from all consideration in the estate, including any allowances, properties, or trusts presently or potentially extended to them." The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of many people doing math very quickly in their heads. Aunt Vivian sat back in her chair. Uncle Bernard uncrossed his arms and placed his hands flat on his knees. The cousin near the back, the one who had said almost nothing, allowed herself the smallest of smiles, which she immediately hid. "Send for Mr. Harlan," Mr. Caldwell said again, this time to the young assistant standing near the door. "If he's working today, he should be at the building. Be respectful when you find him. Tell him only that Miss Lila has asked for him." The assistant nodded and slipped out. The heavy door of the reading room closed behind him with a soft, expensive click. Lila did not move. She sat the same way she had been sitting all morning, hands folded, feet not quite touching the floor, eyes on the door through which the assistant had just disappeared. She did not look at her relatives. She did not look at the lawyer. She simply waited. The minutes that followed were unlike any minutes the reading room had ever held. No one spoke. No one wanted to be the first to fill the silence. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, indifferent to the wealth in the room and the weight of the moment. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded faintly. A pigeon landed on the windowsill, looked at the gathering with the bright, uninterested gaze of a creature that knew nothing of inheritance, and flew away again. Mr. Caldwell turned a page in his folder, though he was not really reading it. Aunt Vivian took out a small mirror from her purse and checked her face, then put it away as if she had not meant to. A man in his middle years, one of the further cousins whose name Lila could not remember, glanced at his watch several times, and Lila thought about Mr. Harlan. She thought about how he always wore his uniform a little neater than it needed to be. The brass buttons polished, his cap straight. She thought about how he stood by the door, even in the rain, even in the snow, even on the hottest days. His hands clasped behind his back, his eyes kind. She thought about how he had taught her when she was little to say thank you, in a way that meant it instead of in a way that just sounded right. He had said, "If you say it like you mean it, Miss Lila, you'll always know whether you do." She had asked him once why he was a doorman. It had not been a rude question, only the curiosity of a child who had begun to notice that the world divided people into different kinds of work. He had thought about her question for a moment, the way he thought about all her questions, as if every one of them deserved the same care. "Because somebody has to be the first face people see when they come home," he had said. "And I think that's an important job, Miss Lila. Maybe more important than people know." She had not understood then. She thought she understood now. The reading room door opened. The assistant stepped back inside, slightly out of breath. Behind him, hat in his hands, his gray hair slightly damp from the light rain outside, stood an old man in a navy blue uniform. Lila's feet swung forward. For the first time that morning, she smiled. Mr. Harlan did not step fully into the room. At first, he stood in the doorway with the quiet uncertainty of a man who had spent his working life never entering rooms unless someone specifically asked him to. His hands held his cap carefully in front of him, the way a man holds something that matters to him. His shoes, Lila noticed, had been wiped clean on the mat outside, even though the rain had only just begun. He looked smaller than he did in the lobby. Lila had never seen him sitting down. She had never seen him without the long, brass-buttoned coat that he wore even in summer. She had never seen him in a room where he was the one being looked at. "Mr. Harlan," the lawyer said, rising from his chair. The simple act of standing changed the temperature of the room. The relatives watching did not quite know what to do with it. "Please come in. Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Yes, sir," Mr. Harlan said. His voice was lower than Lila remembered, gentler, but the same voice that had said good afternoon to her every day for years. The young man said, "Miss Lila asked for me. Is she all right?" It was the first thing he asked. Not why he had been brought to a room full of strangers in suits, not what kind of estate matter required a doorman, only whether the child was all right. Lila felt something warm rise in her chest. She had been holding herself very still all morning, the way her mother had taught her, the way grown-ups expected. But hearing his voice undid something. She slid down from the chair before anyone could stop her and crossed the room toward him. A murmur moved through the relatives. A few of them rose halfway from their seats as if to intervene, then realized they did not have a reason that would not sound terrible out loud, and sat back down. Lila stopped in front of Mr. Harlan. She did not hug him. She had been raised to wait for adults to offer that. She only looked up at him. Her small face turned upward with a steadiness that none of her aunts and uncles had earned. "I'm okay, Mr. Harlan," she said. "Thank you for coming." He smiled at her. It was a small, tired smile, the smile of a man who had not slept well in some time, and the lines around his eyes softened in the way Lila remembered. "Of course, Miss Lila," he said. "I'd come whenever you asked." She nodded as if that was already understood. Then she turned, walked back to her chair, and sat down with the same careful posture as before. Mr. Harlan remained in the doorway, hat in hand, still waiting to be told why he was there. Mr. Caldwell gestured toward an empty chair near the front. "Please sit, Mr. Harlan. There's something we need to discuss with you, and I'd prefer you weren't standing for it." Mr. Harlan hesitated. He looked at the chair, then at the lawyer, then at the room full of people he did not know, every one of them watching him. "Sir," he said carefully, "I don't want to track water on the carpet. I can stand." The simple sentence landed harder than he could have known. Several of the relatives looked away. Aunt Vivian cleared her throat softly and studied her hands. "The carpet will survive, Mr. Harlan," Mr. Caldwell said, and his voice held something like respect. "Please sit." Mr. Harlan sat. He placed his cap on his knee with great care, smoothing the brim once with his thumb. He folded his hands above it. He waited. Mr. Caldwell returned to his own seat and rested his elbows on the table. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. I'd like you to listen all the way through before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." The lawyer drew a slow breath. "You knew Elias and Clara Langford. They lived in an apartment of the building where you have worked for many years. Is that right?" "Many years, sir." Mr. Caldwell nodded. Their daughter Lila was placed under temporary guardianship of the estate following their deaths. Mr. Langford left a will. In it, he asked his daughter to choose who she wished to live with. The court has agreed to honor her choice, provided it is safe. He paused. He let the next sentence rest in the air for a moment before he placed it down. "Mr. Harlan, Lila has chosen you." The old man did not move. For a long moment he simply looked at the lawyer, as if he had misheard. Then very slowly he turned his head and looked at Lila. Lila looked back at him. She did not smile this time. She did not need to. Her eyes, the same dark, steady eyes her mother had given her, simply said what she had already said out loud. She had chosen him. She meant it. She was not going to take it back. Mr. Harlan held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his face shifted slowly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves. He looked back at the lawyer. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think there has been some kind of mistake." "There has not been a mistake, Mr. Harlan. I'm a doorman, sir. Yes, I live in a modest apartment. I've worked the same building for many years. I make a fair wage, but it is not the kind of wage that—" He trailed off. He looked at his hands. He looked at his cap. He looked at the room of people in suits who had inherited the right to sit in chairs like these by being born. I am not someone who raises a child like Miss Lila, not in the way she deserves. That, Mr. Caldwell said, is something we are going to discuss. But before we do, I need to ask you a question, Mr. Harlan, and I need you to answer it honestly. Mr. Harlan nodded once. Did you know that Elias Langford had named you in any capacity in his estate planning? No, sir. Did you ever at any point speak with Mr. Langford about his daughter's future, or your role in her life, or anything resembling guardianship? No, sir, I did not. Did you ever ask the Langfords for anything of any kind in the years you worked at their building? A small flicker of something passed through Mr. Harlan's face. Not a flinch. Something gentler than that. Something sadder. No, sir, he said. I held the door. That was my job. Mr. Caldwell wrote something on the page in front of him. The pen moved slowly, deliberately, as if he wanted whoever read the file later to understand that he had paid attention to every word. Mr. Harlan, he said, looking up again, I have been a lawyer for a long time. I have met a great many people who wanted things from the Langford family. I do not believe you are one of them. I want you to hear that from me clearly before the rest of this conversation continues. A breath moved through Mr. Harlan that he did not seem to realize he had been holding. He nodded once slowly and looked down at his cap again. Now, Mr. Caldwell continued, the choice belongs to Lila, but the responsibility, if you accept it, would belong to you. The estate would provide for her care, her schooling, her medical needs, her future. It would also provide for you, in your role as her legal guardian, in a manner consistent with the standard of life she has known. You would not be expected to raise her in a modest apartment. You would not be expected to leave your work, although you would be free to do so. You would be expected simply to be the adult in her life. Mr. Harlan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very low. Sir, he said, I lost my wife some years ago. We had a daughter once. She passed when she was small. We never had another child. I have lived alone for a long time, and I have made my peace with it. I am not a young man. I am not a wealthy man. I do not know if I am the man Miss Lila needs. He paused. He looked up. He looked at Lila. But if she has truly chosen me, he said, and his voice did not break, though it bent, then I would not refuse her. I have never refused her anything she has asked of me, and I do not intend to start today. Lila's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She had learned in the past months how to hold tears in the place behind her eyes where they could wait until later. She only nodded. A sound came from the back of the room. It was Aunt Vivian, and it was a sound that was supposed to be a laugh but came out wrong. This is madness, she said. Mr. Caldwell, you cannot seriously be entertaining this. The man has just told you he lives modestly. He has just told you he is alone. He is older, for goodness sake. Older, ma'am, Mr. Harlan said quietly without looking at her. The correction landed harder than her objection. Aunt Vivian flushed, the color rising up her neck in two uneven patches. She had been the kind of woman all her life who corrected other people. She was not used to being corrected, especially not by a doorman, especially not gently. That isn't the point, she said quickly. The point is that this child needs stability. She needs family. She needs the kind of upbringing her parents would have wanted with people who knew them, who shared their values. Aunt Vivian, Lila said. It was the first time she had used the woman's name all day. The room turned toward her. You came to our apartment a couple of times when I was little, Lila said. Her voice was small, but it carried. Both times you brought a photographer. You wanted pictures of us together. You never came again after the magazine printed them. The color in Aunt Vivian's face deepened. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again with nothing in it. And Uncle Bernard, Lila said, turning her head slightly. You told my daddy I shouldn't be at the Christmas party because I would make some of the guests uncomfortable. I heard you. I was on the other side of the door. Uncle Bernard went very still. The veins on the backs of his hands stood out. He did not look at her. He did not look at anyone. "I remember things," Lila said quietly. "I'm only a child, but I remember." Mr. Harlan had gone perfectly still in his chair. His knuckles, where they rested on his cap, were white. He did not turn his head, but his jaw moved once slowly, the way a man's jaw moves when he is choosing not to say something. He had spent many years opening doors for people who said terrible things in front of him, as if he were furniture. He had heard worse. He had learned long ago that the people who treated him as invisible were also the people who treated their own children as accessories. He had not known until this moment just how completely the Langford family had treated this particular child. Mr. Caldwell set his pen down with a small, deliberate click. "Mrs. Langford, Mr. Langford, I do not believe either of you wishes to continue speaking right now. I would advise you very strongly to take a few moments to consider what you say next and how it will be remembered when it appears in the transcript of this proceeding." The word transcript did what the word estate had done earlier. It moved through the room and rearranged the priorities of everyone in it. Aunt Vivian closed her mouth. Uncle Bernard pressed his palms flat against his knees. A few of the more distant cousins looked at each other with the careful blankness of people who had just decided to be on the winning side, whichever side that turned out to be. Mr. Caldwell turned back to Mr. Harlan. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "I will not pressure you. This is a significant decision. You may take time to think about it. You may consult anyone you wish to consult. You may ask any question you have, and I will answer it as honestly as I can. Do you have questions for me?" Now, Mr. Harlan looked down at his cap. He was quiet for a long time. The room let him be quiet. Even Aunt Vivian, who had spent her whole life filling silence with sound, let him be quiet. When he finally spoke, his question was not the one anyone expected. "Sir," he said, "does she have to keep going to the same school?" Mr. Caldwell blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Miss Lila," Mr. Harlan said, still not looking up. "She told me recently that she did not like her school very much. She said the other children were not kind to her. She said the teachers did not always notice. I told her she should tell her mother. I do not know if she ever did, but if I am to be the one she lives with, I would want her to be in a school where she is happy, or at least where she is seen." The room was silent again. It was a different kind of silence this time. Lila looked at him. She had not known until that moment that he had remembered the conversation. She had only mentioned it once. She had only been speaking the way children speak to adults they trust, and he had only been listening the way he always listened. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "she can go to any school you choose." The meeting did not end quickly after that. Lawyers, even good ones, do not allow significant decisions to conclude in single sentences. Mr. Caldwell walked Mr. Harlan through documents, explained the powers and limitations of guardianship, outlined the financial structures that would be put in place. A second attorney was brought in to represent Mr. Harlan independently because Mr. Caldwell insisted that no one in his position should sign anything without counsel. The second attorney, a quiet woman named Ms. Delaney, listened to the situation, looked at Mr. Harlan for a long moment, and then sat down beside him and began explaining the papers one page at a time, slowly enough that he could ask questions and not feel rushed. He asked good questions. He did not ask any questions about money. He asked about Lila's health insurance, about her dental records, about whether she would need to change pediatricians. He asked about the schedule of her therapist, the one she had been seeing since her parents died. He asked whether she had any allergies the staff at her current school had been told about, because he wanted to be sure he was told too. Each question made Lila sit a little straighter in her chair. Each question made another relative shift uncomfortably in theirs. By the time the meeting ended, several hours had passed. The room had thinned. Some of the family members had quietly left, claiming appointments. Aunt Vivian and Uncle Bernard had remained less out of dignity than out of the slow understanding that leaving early might look worse than staying. They sat with their hands in their laps now, watching, and the practiced expressions they had worn that morning had loosened into something more honest. Exhaustion, calculation, the faintest trace of shame in the few who were capable of it. Mr. Caldwell closed his folder. "We will need a transition period, a few weeks at minimum. Mr. Harlan, you will need time to make arrangements with your employer, with your apartment, with anything else that requires notice. Lila will continue to stay at the estate's residence. During this time with the household staff she already knows. You may visit her as often as you wish. We will keep the press out of this for as long as we can, but the family is large and I cannot promise discretion forever. Are these terms acceptable?" "Yes, sir." "Lila." "Yes, sir." He nodded. He stood. He extended his hand toward Mr. Harlan across the long table. Mr. Harlan rose slowly, smoothed his uniform with one hand, and took the lawyer's hand with the other. The handshake was firm and unhurried. It was the handshake of a man who had shaken many hands in his life and had learned somewhere along the way that you could tell a great deal about a person from the way they held yours. "Welcome to a very long road, Mr. Harlan," Mr. Caldwell said. "Thank you, sir." When Mr. Harlan turned to leave, Lila was already standing beside her chair. She walked over to him, without waiting to be told it was time, and, this time, she did not stop in front of him. She stepped past the careful distance she had kept all morning, and put her arms around his waist. For a moment, Mr. Harlan did not move. His hands hovered above her shoulders, as if he had forgotten how to use them. Then slowly, very slowly, he placed one hand on the top of her head, and the other across her back, and he held her the way a grandfather holds a child he has been waiting for, even though he did not know he was waiting. "It's all right, Miss Lila," he said quietly. "It's going to be all right." She nodded against him. The car ride home to the estate's residence, where she would stay for a little while longer, felt different than any car ride she had taken since the accident. Mr. Harlan rode with her in the back seat. The driver, a man named Mr. Alvarez, who had worked for the family for many years, glanced into the rearview mirror once and gave Lila a small, surprised smile. Lila smiled back. Mr. Alvarez was one of the people who had been kind to her, too. She made a small mental note. There would be others she suspected that Mr. Harlan would want to know about. Halfway through the ride, Mr. Harlan spoke. "Miss Lila," he said. "Yes, Mr. Harlan, I want you to know something." She turned her head to look at him. "I am not going to be your mother and father," he said carefully. "I cannot be. But I am going to try very hard to be exactly what you need me to be. And whenever I get it wrong, I want you to tell me." She thought about it. Then she said, "Okay." A pause. "Mr. Harlan." "Yes, Miss Lila." "You don't have to call me Miss anymore." He considered that. Then he smiled. The same tired smile, the same kind eyes. "I'd like to keep it if that's all right with you," he said. "It's how I've always thought of you." Lila nodded. "Okay." She looked out the window. The city moved past them. For the first time in many months, she did not feel like she was being driven somewhere she did not want to go. The weeks that followed were quieter than anyone had expected. The story did not stay out of the press for long. A cousin, no one would ever be entirely sure which one, leaked the basic facts to a society columnist a few weeks after the reading. The headline that ran the next morning was the kind of headline that sold papers. "Langford Harris chooses family doorman over wealthy relatives." The article ran with two photographs. One of Lila at her parents' funeral, head bowed in a black coat too large for her, and one of Mr. Harlan in his uniform taken from a distance. His face partially turned away as if he were trying not to be seen. He had not been told the photograph was taken. He learned about it from a tenant in the building, an older woman from another floor, who had stopped him in the lobby one morning holding the newspaper out with both hands. "Harlan," she had said, and it was the first time in years anyone in the building had called him by his first name. "Harlan, is this true?" He had nodded once carefully and continued holding the door for her. The building reacted in ways he had not anticipated. Some tenants smiled at him differently now. Some looked away when they had not looked away before. A young couple brought him a small wrapped box a few days after the article. Inside it was a tin of butter cookies and a card that said in careful handwriting, "Thank you for being the kind of neighbor we want to be." He kept the card in the inside pocket of his coat for a while before he could bring himself to put it down. The Langford family did not give up easily. Two of the more aggressive cousins filed a petition with the court, citing concerns about Mr. Harlan's age, his health, his financial background, and what their attorney called the obvious vulnerabilities of a minor child's decision-making capacity. Mr. Caldwell handled the petition with the calm of a man who had expected it. He produced Elias Langford's medical records, which showed that Mr. Langford had been of sound mind when he wrote the will. He produced a psychological evaluation of Lila, conducted by an independent child psychologist over several sessions, which concluded that Lila had a clear understanding of her choice, that her choice was consistent with her stated wishes both before and after her parents' deaths, and that pressuring her to revisit her decision would be more harmful than allowing it to stand. He produced, finally, a letter Elias Langford had written to his attorney some months before his death, in which he had named Mr. Harlan by name as a person his daughter trusted, and as a person he himself had quietly come to admire over the years. The petition was denied within a month. During that month, Mr. Harlan visited Lila every day after his shift at the building. He did not move into the Langford residence right away. He did not feel he had earned the right to do so, and Mr. Caldwell agreed that a gradual transition was wiser. So instead, he came each evening in his uniform, and they ate dinner together at the small table in the kitchen. Not the long table in the dining room. The household staff, who had loved Lila quietly for years, took to Mr. Harlan within days. The cook learned his preferences without being asked. The housekeeper found him a pair of slippers because she noticed his feet hurt at the end of his shifts. Mr. Alvarez, the driver, began offering to pick him up from the building in the evenings, though Mr. Harlan always politely refused. He preferred to take the subway. It gave him time to think. He thought about Lila. He thought about how to be what she needed. He thought about the daughter he had lost long ago, who had been small when the fever took her, and how he had not allowed himself to think about her in a long time, because thinking about her had broken something in him that took years to put back together. He thought about his wife, who had said to him once near the end, "Harlan, you have so much love left in you. Don't let it die with me." He had not understood then what she meant. He had only nodded and kissed her hand, and tried not to cry. He understood now. One evening after dinner, Lila climbed onto the couch beside him and rested her head against his arm. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Mr. Harlan did not say anything either. He only placed his hand very gently on the top of her head the way he had at the meeting. For a long time they sat there together. Outside the city moved. Inside time slowed, and neither of them, for the first time in a long time, felt alone. The day Mr. Harlan officially stopped working as a doorman came in the fall. He had given his employer ample notice, which was longer than required, because he did not believe in leaving people in difficulty. The building hired a younger man to replace him, a polite young father from the city named Mr. Cooper. And Mr. Harlan spent his last weeks training him, not just in the practical duties of the job, but in the smaller things, the things that did not appear in any manual, which tenants liked to be greeted by name, and which preferred a quiet nod, which deliveries to accept, and which to politely turn away. How to remember a child's birthday without making the parents feel watched. How to stand for long hours without breaking down at the knees. On his last day, the building threw him a small farewell in the lobby. He had not asked for it. He had not wanted it. But people came anyway, tenants from every floor. Some he had known for many years, some who had moved in only recently. They brought cards and small gifts and stories about him that he did not remember and they could not forget. A woman from one of the floors told the story of how he had walked her dog for several weeks after her hip surgery, refusing payment, refusing thanks, refusing even acknowledgement when she tried to bring it up again afterward. A man from another floor said that Mr. Harlan had been the first person to congratulate him when his wife became pregnant and the first person to embrace him quietly when some months later the pregnancy was lost. Lila stood beside him through all of it. She wore a small navy blue dress that the housekeeper had picked out for her, and she held Mr. Harlan's hand without thinking, the way children hold the hands of the adults they trust. When the building manager presented Mr. Harlan with a clock as a retirement gift, Mr. Harlan thanked him politely and then handed it to Lila because he said she would have more years ahead of her to make use of it than he would. The room laughed. Lila did not. She held the clock carefully and looked up at him with the same steady eyes she had used the morning she had chosen him. And she did not let go of his hand, even when the photographer asked her to. The transition into the Langford residence happened gradually. Mr. Harlan did not move all of his belongings at once. He brought them in stages, the way a person moves into a life they are not yet sure they deserve. A box of books, a framed photograph of his wife taken on their wedding day many years ago, a small wooden carving his daughter had made before she died, a clumsy little bird with one wing slightly longer than the other, which he had kept on his bedside table for many years. He placed the carving on the mantel in the room he had chosen as his own. It was not the largest bedroom in the residence. He had refused the larger ones. He had chosen instead a small guest room near Lila's, because he wanted to be close if she needed him in the night, and because the room reminded him in its modest proportions of the apartment where he had lived for many years. Lila saw the carving the first time she came into his room. She did not ask about it. She seemed to understand, without being told, that some things did not need explanation. She only looked at it for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "It's a beautiful bird." Mr. Harlan did not answer. He could not for a moment. He only nodded. She enrolled at her new school in the fall. It was a smaller school than the one her parents had chosen, with classes of 15 instead of 30, and teachers who knew every student's name on the first day. Mr. Harlan walked her to the door on her first morning. He had insisted on walking, even though Mr. Alvarez had offered the car. The school was only a short distance away. They walked slowly. They did not talk much. Lila carried her own backpack. Mr. Harlan carried at her request the small wooden bird which she had asked to take with her for the day. At the door, she turned and looked up at him. "Mr. Harlan," she said. "Yes, Miss Lila. You'll be here when school is done." "I will be here, Miss Lila." She nodded. She took the wooden bird carefully from his hand, and she walked inside. The years moved the way years move when something good is holding them together quietly, without drama, without the kind of milestones that announce themselves in advance. Lila grew older. The wooden bird stayed on her bedside table. She did not lose it. She did not break it. She handled it the way one handles the love of someone who is no longer here, the way Mr. Harlan had handled it for many years. She did not ask him about the little girl who had carved it until she was older. He told her then on a quiet afternoon, sitting beside her on the couch in the living room of the residence that had once felt enormous and now simply felt like home. He told her about a child named Lily, who had loved birds and who had wanted to be a person who saved them when she grew up. He told her about the fever that came one winter, and about the days afterward when he and his wife had not been sure they would survive their own grief. He told her about the bird carved with small, uncertain hands and how Lily had given it to him on a Father's Day morning and said, "Daddy, it's for you because birds remind me of you." He did not know even now what she had meant by that. He had asked her at the time, and she had only laughed and run away, the way small children do when they have said something they do not have the words to explain. Lila listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned her head against his shoulder, the way she had on the first night she had eaten dinner with him in the kitchen, and she said, "Mr. Harlan, I think maybe she meant that you carry people." He had to close his eyes for a moment. "I think maybe she did, Miss Lila," he said finally. "I think maybe she did." The Langford family in time came back. Not all of them. Some had been too clearly exposed in the reading room that morning to ever be welcome again. And they knew it, and they kept their distance. But others, the quieter cousins, the ones who had said almost nothing because they had nothing rehearsed to say, slowly began to reach out. A birthday card here, a holiday visit there. Mr. Harlan welcomed each of them carefully, neither warmly nor coldly, with the same measured kindness he had once used to greet tenants in the lobby. He let Lila decide who to let close. She let in the ones who had been honest. She kept the others at the careful distance they had earned. One year at her school's awards ceremony, Lila stood at a small podium and read aloud a short essay she had written. The essay was about a man, she said, who had taught her that the most important job in the world was being the first kind face someone saw when they came home. She did not name him. She did not need to. He sat in the third row in a suit he had bought just for the occasion, his hands folded in his lap, his cap nowhere to be seen because he no longer needed one. And his eyes did what they had not done in many years. They filled, they overflowed. He did not wipe them. He let them. He had learned finally that some tears were not weakness. Some tears were the simple acknowledgement of a life that had become somehow, against every expectation, full. After the ceremony, Lila walked to him through the small crowd of parents and teachers. She did not run. She walked the way she had always walked, steady and certain. She stopped in front of him and looked up. She was almost as tall as his shoulder now. "Mr. Harlan," she said. "Yes, Miss Lila. Thank you for coming." "I would come whenever you asked," he said. He had said it once before on a morning long ago in a room full of strangers who had not understood what he meant. He meant it the same way now. She nodded. She took his hand. And together, slowly, they walked out of the auditorium and into the afternoon. This story reminds us that kindness, the truest kind, costs nothing and changes everything. It is the small choice to see someone when the world has not. It is the quiet decision to remember a child's name, to listen when no one else does, to stand at a door for many years and treat every person who walks through it as if they matter. We do not always know whose life we are shaping in the moments we believe we are simply doing our job. We do not always know who is watching us be kind. But the world is built gently and without applause by the people who choose to be the first kind face someone sees. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, the kindness we gave without thinking comes back to us in ways we never could have imagined. If this story is reaching you in some quiet way, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if you believe stories about ordinary kindness still matter in a world that has forgotten how to slow down, please subscribe. There will be more.